welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell. Hi, Rose.
Happy Earth Day, Christine.
Hey, 50 years.
50 years that some activists have been really working this problem.
Yeah, I think that as we've talked about before, the pandemic has actually given the Earth some breathing space, which is kind of what Earth Day was intended to do all along. So we'll just celebrate that.
Yeah, there's been some incredible pictures of wildlife coming into, I think the first ones I saw were the canals in Venice with the swans and the dolphins coming in.
So there aren't dolphins. That was a fake.
Oh, it was a fake thing?
Yes, but there are more animals coming back, but not dolphins I saw that too and was excited now.
So I will tell you, I walk, one of the only areas that's still open here is there's a walk on Coronado Island that goes along the bay, Glorieta Bay. And I met my son there to walk his dog. You know, we're 6 feet apart. We got our little masks on and the whole thing, but you need to get exercise. And as we were coming back, walking towards our cars, there were dolphins in the bay. I just started crying. I'm like, oh my God, I've never seen them that close before. I mean, I've seen them from a distance jumping, but they were just, it's very cool to see animals coming in. And it also at the same time makes you realize that humanity might not be missed too much.
And on that happy note, let's talk about, again, extrapolating lessons from this corona pandemic. Apparently, we are afraid of dying. And in fact,
who knew?
And our society doesn't deal well with death. But our question is then, maybe now that we've acknowledged collectively that we don't want to die, and in fact, we like to breathe clean air, is this going to change our response to climate change?
Yeah, I mean, obviously on Earth Day, there's many of us that are hoping so and channeling that energy to, again, I know we mentioned in the past the Himalayan mountains that are now visible from a distance for the first time in 30 years, which amounts to all of those. The air there is much cleaner, and it's so interesting. I don't believe in coincidence, but a respiratory illness is what's clearing the air. Okay. Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking about this topic the other day when I was going on one of my walks around the neighborhood, again, obviously maintaining social distancing. And I was thinking, why am I so afraid? Okay, like what is going on with me? Because my stress level has been higher than usual. And this was last week. And I thought, okay, so think about this. It's a pandemic. There's a chance that you could get it. There's a chance that somebody you love could get it. Okay, so it's a fear of getting sick, but ultimately that I would die or that somebody I love would die. This is what we're looking at, right? And so for me, it's like, okay, well, that's a perspective, because am I that afraid of death? I feel like my own worldview is such that there's a lot of hard things in this world. Sometimes leaving it seems like it would be easier than sticking around. And of course, you know, I love my family and I want to be here for my family, but I just needed to kind of get my head around the fact that, okay, we're talking about death here. I happen to believe in reincarnation and a connection to divine and source. And so like, just relax, just this is me talking to myself, by the way. Just
Mhm.
relax. Kind of give it over to source, to guardian angels, to whoever, and just relax. Do what you can. Put it in perspective. Okay. We all know we're going to die. None of us are getting off of this planet alive.
No.
And so for me, that kind of focuses my life for me. Okay, what do I then want to do when I'm here? And I guess that's sort of what I thought we could talk about, not what I'm going to do when I'm here, but the idea that our society in general, Western culture, doesn't deal with death well. We pretend it doesn't happen. And part of
Mhm.
that pretending has brought us into this environmental crisis because we just pretend that we're not going to hit the wall, right? Life just going to go on. We're focusing on the trivial, distractions, and what we can't change. And if you deny that you're going to die, then that has so many implications for the way you live. And
Absolutely.
and so collectively, it has implications for the way we live collectively on the planet, which collectively hasn't been that great.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I'm processing this as we're talking. We we don't acknowledge that we're going to die in our day-to-day life, right? So therefore, we don't acknowledge that by our behavior, other species are going extinct. That we don't act in a way that we value life. We value, well, it's really apparent here in the United States right now. It's just crazy making that we don't value the lives of others over our ability, over our freedom to do whatever the blank we want. And so, yeah, how does all of that come together? How is that all related to our not acknowledging our own personal demise?
And I would say, in contrast to, say, indigenous cultures, the culture that I know best is indigenous cultures in Canada, where they say, okay, when you take an action, consider the implications for seven generations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
Well, and so Western culture would be like, I want this to be clean, but F future generations, F anybody besides me and maybe my family, but maybe even F my family, as long as I get to do what I want to do. We're so focused on immediate gratification, maybe because of the consumer society, and yet we are not present. We distract ourselves. Amazing disconnect.
and I mean, I would say too, it's this, at the root, is it maybe our focus on the physical. So we lost touch with, if you look historically, even in Western cultures, there was a sense of being somehow connected to divine, to God. And
Mm-hmm.
and that's certainly true in other cultures. And then we got Western, the Enlightenment, which is important. And I don't want to say that it's not important, but what it did was it took us from one extreme, kind of superstition and controlled by the powerful in the church, to the other extreme. So in between, we got all of these wonderful inventions, the microscope, the antibiotics, right up to my lovely iPhone.
Right.
So really good, but is it time to swing back to the middle, at least for the pendulum to go back? Okay, so it turns out that it really is true. The most important things in life can't be counted or can't be quantified. How do you quantify love? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And we know
Mm-hmm.
that it's our relationships, our connection to other people, which is coming home to many of us at this time.
Many of us.
That
But not all of it. But not all of us, interestingly enough, not all of us.
doesn't have to be all of us, Rose.
I know, but it's interesting to me because as we're talking about this, our what are we learning about our fear of death, how it's affecting us. I mean, we're bumping up against it right now, okay? So back in the day when I was very young, I think I've mentioned this before. I lost my sister when I was 15, and that really she's been the biggest influence on my life. Losing her role in the family, all kinds of stuff, it becomes very enmeshed. But when I was first in college, I took a class on death and dying. And it was based on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book. So this is back in the late 70s, okay? And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she was a big deal. I mean, she really looked at the experiences of those who were dying, maybe for the first time ever, and interviewed all kinds of people and all that kind of stuff. I'll put a link to her book online. But she was the one who came up with the idea that there are 5 stages when you're looking at your own death. And the first is denial. Okay. And when I look at what's going on with the pandemic right now, I'm like, okay, so it's kind of the same thing. We're watching, we're seeing people die. We're watching the way we have lived die. We're birthing something new. So there's a lot of that feeling of nothing's ever going to be the same. And how do it's very much the way and I'm processing this as we talk too. So sorry, it's not very succinct, but we're dealing with it much in the same way that we deal with death. We're dealing with this pandemic in much the same way that we deal with death. Denial, then anger, right? People are bull. It's not, and they're putting it on, they're angry at their governors, and they're angry that they can't go to work and stuff. They're angry because they're scared, because they see their own vulnerability and they see their own mortality, and they see those who, whether they want to admit it or not, and they're in denial that something could happen to them. Give me liberty, give me death, and they're standing there without a face mask, and people are shaking hands with each other at these protests and stuff, and it's like, it's
Well,
mind-boggling.
as Charles
But they're angry too.
Darwin, I've seen this meme of Charles Darwin saying, "Okay, carry on."
Yeah. So, but then you get to the point where you're kind of bargaining. Okay, well, and maybe that's it. Okay, well, we'll stay home, and and we'll slow down, and we'll so some of us are in the bargaining. We'll do what we feel is necessary. The next stage is depression. And I think some people are feeling like they're isolated. I mean, I'm in a place where I've got somebody else, a couple other people in the house with me, so I'm not by myself. I have a lovely lanai. I can get out and walk in my neighborhood. I think about those people that are in New York City, and they're in a high rise, and they're on the 20th floor, and they're in 2 bedrooms, and they have one window looking outside, and they're afraid to go out in the hallway. So there's that certain, we've got to get through that. And then on the other side, there's an acceptance. Okay, this is going to happen. None of us is getting out alive. None of us
Off the planet. Hopefully we'll get out of the pandemic alive.
Yeah, well, yes. Yes. Yes, we will get out of the pandemic alive, but none of us is getting out of here alive. And then, so can we come to an acceptance of our mortality and start, like you're saying, start addressing daily life? Like, it doesn't matter. Buying the next pair of shoes is not the most important. Keeping the economic machine going, yes, it's important, but is it the primary importance? Is it of primary importance?
It's important that people have livelihoods, have houses over their heads, and have food on their table. But is this economic model the only way to do it? Probably not. Most people would say, and it doesn't do it very well. It's been, the inequality gap has been only widening in in Western countries. So yeah, it is an opportunity to redefine ourselves. But I really think that we don't do that. We collectively don't do that unless we recognize and come to terms with our own mortality. We'll say it again. None of us are getting off this planet alive. And so what does that look like when we as a society takes that seriously? And oh, you know what? I heard a great Facebook Live concert today by one of my favorite Canadian musicians called John Brooks. And he's got this song that addresses exactly that. What you take with you, it turns out, is the love. I'm going to put that up podcast page because we actually played it at my mom's funeral.
Nice.
It's lovely. Just a reminder, what we take with us when we leave, and this is what people who have near-death experiences tell us, it's about the love that you've shared with other people. And often people with near-death experiences say that there's a life review and you get to feel the emotions of your actions on the other people.
And how it's affected other
How
people.
it's affected them. So you might want to think about how your actions are affecting other people. If this actually is what happens for each of us. I mean, for lots of reasons, but if you want to think of it like about yourself, you're going to have to experience those too. So think about, Jesus said, do unto others. Turns out he was this pretty smart guy.
Yeah, who knew? Well, and I think we're seeing, well, it's giving all of us time to really think. And now that we're letting go of the busyness, and it's painful when you don't have things to distract you. When you first have to get really quiet. I don't know who it was that said sitting in the silence, and I'm not going to do it justice either. Is sitting in the silence is when you really learn to hear. You have to get really silent to hear. And I think it's to hear the divine, but also to hear what the little voice inside yourself, your higher self, that knows the direction that you should be taking, that you get so off course because you're distracted by all the shiny objects. So the shiny objects are maybe not, no maybe, but the shiny objects are not of primary importance. And if we can learn that lesson from COVID-19, can we extrapolate that to how we react to climate? It's harder for us to react to climate because we've got these goals that are like, oh, we're going to do this by 2030, we're going to do this by 2040, we're going to do this by 2050. Yeah, it's hard to really, if I'm worried about what I'm having for dinner tonight, how can I think about 2050?
Well,
but we're being presented with the lesson right now. It's none of us is escaping it right now. We get to look at the lesson, and it's painful, it's scary. But with every challenge, there's an opportunity.
Well, and so I agree, and I want to read a little bit from a video of President Emmanuel Macron of France. And he...
Yay, leadership, yay, leadership.
Intelligent leadership, articulate leadership. Okay, he's not too hard on the eyes either.
No.
So,
but yes, and as a sapiosexual, someone who just, smart man, it's all about that to me. Yeah. So yes, I'm just like, okay.
I will say he was interviewed by the Financial Times, and I will post a link to it. It's a video. It's about 20 minutes, but it really is from about 14.
And it is in French with English subtitles.
Yes, from about 14 minutes and 44 seconds to the end is where he addresses specifically the pandemic and climate change and discusses that. I have to say the translation is not great. And in fact, my daughter, who is a French to English translator, I've sent her it, and she's going to do a better translation because she and I went over.
Well, so then maybe you can put that in a Google Doc, and we can put that Google Doc, a link to the Google Doc.
Yeah, I'll definitely share it. What I'm going to read now is kind of paraphrasing. If you go to the video, you'll see it won't say exactly that, and Kate will do a better job than I did of translating it. So the interviewer asks him a question about whether he's afraid that the virus will, and that crisis will negatively influence the way the world addresses climate action and reducing the need to reduce emissions. And he says he doesn't think so. And he says something like, I deeply think that those two are linked. And what humanity is now experiencing with COVID-19 is this fear for its life. And that we are discovering human worth. And that we are scared for ourselves. We're threatened. And it says that we're realizing collectively, he goes on to say, that one doesn't hesitate to take hard decisions and brutal choices when lives are at stake. And he goes on to say it is the same for the climate risk. Then he goes on, the big pandemics with the severe respiratory syndrome ailments like we are experiencing now, they seemed far away when they happened before because they stayed in Asia. And the climate risk seems very far away. It only concerns Africa or the Pacific nations, but when it happens to you, you wake up. And I say to every developed country, let's not wait for the climatic awakening to live through what we're going through now in terms of health. We're experiencing our own vulnerability. So we have to go faster. Even though I care deeply about this topic, I think we have to, at the roots, change our model to have resilience, the capacity to say how to prevent the risk of a heat wave, a deterioration in air quality. They translated it upheaval in biodiversity, but basically the deterioration in biodiversity that will change lives. What are we afraid of with regards to COVID-19? We're afraid of suffocating. People will tell you this. There is this fear of death that had somewhat left our societies because we thought we could, like Prometheus, be free from it. But now we are afraid of suffocating. And I think that this fear, no one said so, but it is really there. The fear of suffocating is the fear of not being able to breathe. We'll get out of this crisis. People will not bear to breathe contaminated air anymore. You'll see. And
so hope so.
he really ties the two together. And then he says at the same time, this is later on, I think that these moments of crisis are the ones that allow us to possibly imagine something new for humankind. So a new balance between men and women, to imagine what being in the world means, built on the values of education and health and the environment. So that is a significant world leader saying this, admittedly in French with a poor English translation, but it gets the gist across. I love that he makes that connection between our fear of death and COVID-19 and the impacts of climate change, which are about our whole life changing. That's why you and I are climate activists. We want a livable world for our kids.
And our possible grandchildren.
True.
Hint, hint, hint.
No hint on my part. That was all Rose.
Because I know my son listens to this podcast, so he'll be annoyed. And if I don't annoy him, then I'm not doing my job as a mother.
All right. So
good news. There is some good news. The oil market has just crashed. So the news this week was that oil is below $1, is below zero. How does that happen?
I know.
And that other group, Citigroup, has divested. Citigroup is a bank. I actually have a Citigroup credit card. So we continue to see the pandemic making changes for the betterment of our world.
And I would say on that, I did get a email from Avaz, talked about before, this global. So don't think that the oil industry isn't lobbying day and night for a bailout.
Well, yeah, they're talking about where can they stash all this cheap oil? Can they put it in caves? Really? Can we fill tankers with it? Can we just consume because we want to buy at the low so we can sell at the high. I mean, it's okay.
I mean, we are going to need oil. It's not that we're never going to need oil. It's that this is an opportunity to jumpstart the clean green economy. But there is this risk of oil industry, which has still is, because it's been such heavy lobbyist because they could afford it.
Because it's been such a blight on existence. But
Because they can afford it, and so they've been lobbying really, really hard to get a bailout. So we'll put a link. Maybe that will be one of our action tips if you want to sign that Avaz petition, online petition that just says no bailout for the richest. Okay, this isn't what it says, but the oil and gas industry is the richest industry on the planet, and they want to be at the trough. Whereas we think citizens should be the ones benefiting from their hard-earned tax dollars, bailing, the bailout, whatever comes, because the economy is going to need help. And so that's good news. And the action tip is related to a vase. And then another possible action tip is we'll put this video of Emmanuel Macron on if anybody wants to watch. I'd recommend the whole 20 minutes. I've watched it a few times and probably will again, because he just has such an intelligent take on what's going on. And
there's a couple other videos. So there was just an interview with John Kerry, who was the Secretary of State under Obama, and he's talking about he's talking about Earth Day and the link between COVID and climate, and how this is really our moment.
Okay.
So that would be another video to watch.
Okay, so we'll put that link on. And then for a sanity tip, I think watching those videos will give people some encouragement. And so we'll also put on, because we did talk a little bit about death and dying, if you want for your sanity tip, there's a really interesting TED Talk. Dr. Christopher Kerr. It's called I See Dead People, Dreams and Visions of the Dying. It's from 2015, and he's a palliative care physician and just talks about his experience of looking after people who are in the dying process and how it can actually be a positive experience at some level.
Because of what they can teach us?
Because of what they learn. What they can teach us, yes, but what he's observed is that there's often a sense of completion that comes in the last days and weeks. So I don't want to give it all away. We'll put the link up as our sanity tip. And of course, get out and walk or ride bike or whatever you can during this lockdown, safely do. That would also obviously be important.
Yeah, I think, just connecting with nature, even if it's just, I sit out on my patio at night and just listen to the birds. It gives me a sense of peace.
Nice. Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use song for the ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.